Genghis Khan had so many children. He's in your DNA. Before he became Genghis Khan, the most feared name on earth, he was just a boy named Temujin, born into hardship, carved by betrayal, and molded by survival. His legend began not in the halls of gold palaces or written scrolls, but on the cold, unforgiving Mongolian steppe, where the wind howls like a beast, and the sky never gives mercy. Temujin came into the world in 1162, near the banks of the Onon River. From the very moment of his birth, the elders whispered of signs. He was born clutching a blood clot in his tiny fist, a symbol, they said, that fate had chosen him for war, but fate would not make it easy. His early life was brutal, even by the merciless standards of the steppe. His father, Yesugei, was a tribal chieftain, respected and strong. He had ambitions for his son, alliances, power, and leadership. But when Temujin was only 9, his father was poisoned by enemies during a peace negotiation. Just like that, the family's protection vanished. Suddenly, Temujin, his mother, and his siblings were cast out by their own clan. No warriors stood by them. No food was shared. They were left to die in the wilderness. But his mother, Hoelun, refused. She taught her children how to dig for roots when there was no meat, how to trap rats when the deer were gone, how to survive on frozen berries and bark when the snow blanketed everything. Temujin learned that life would not feed him. He had to take what he needed. Even as a child, his eyes burned with intensity. He did not laugh often. He did not speak much. He watched. He remembered. The steppe taught him lessons no school could ever match. One day, a rival boy from another family stole something from Temujin. Maybe food, maybe pride. Temujin didn't argue. He waited. Then he hunted the boy down, killed him, and left his body as a warning. He was no longer just a boy. He was becoming something else, something sharper, something colder. By his teens, he began to gather allies, not because of bloodlines or noble birth, but because of his presence. Men followed him, not because they had to, but because they feared what he could become. He rescued his kidnapped wife, Berta, from an enemy tribe, launching a daring attack with a handful of loyal fighters. That act alone marked him as different. While others accepted fate, Temujin fought it. He didn't just survive the steppe, he bent it to his will. Over the years, his name spread, first in whispers, then in roars. He built his army from the outcasts, the abandoned, the broken men like him. He offered them not comfort, but purpose. He destroyed the old tribal system of nobility and replaced it with raw loyalty. Former slaves became generals. Children of commoners became leaders. He rewarded merit, punished betrayal without hesitation, and demanded absolute unity. By 1206, after decades of blood, ambushes, alliances, and war, he had done the unthinkable. He had united the fractured Mongol tribes into one unstoppable force. They crowned him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. But uniting Mongolia was not his dream. It was merely the beginning. He looked to the horizon, to the massive cities of the Jin dynasty, to the Persian lands of Khwarezm, to the endless riches of the Silk Road. And he decided the world would know his name or it would burn. His armies moved like thunder, tens of thousands on horseback, trained to fire arrows at full gallop, disciplined beyond imagination. They conquered faster than any empire in history. Entire cities surrendered at the mere mention of his name. Those who didn't were erased. The world watched in horror as a new kind of warlord emerged, one who didn't just kill to conquer, but to send a message. But here's what the world often forgets. Genghis Khan wasn't just building an empire of land. He was building an empire of blood. With every conquest, he took wives. Not one, not 5, but hundreds. Sometimes out of desire, often out of strategy. These weren't just marriages. They were political moves. He linked himself by blood to every tribe, every culture, every conquered region. His children would inherit not just land and titles, but DNA that stitched across the known world. His sons and daughters were sent across Asia as governors, emissaries, and spies. His daughters, in particular, were given power, real power. They ruled cities. They manipulated trade. They married enemy kings and then poisoned them. In a time when women were silenced, Genghis used them as strategic weapons. And still, he had more children. He fathered so many that even his own record keepers couldn't count them all. Dozens, hundreds, some say over 1,000. He made no secret of it. He was planting legacy, not just in stone, but in blood. He did not know it then, but what he started would echo not just across borders, but across generations. Because centuries later, in the early 2000s, geneticists made a shocking discovery. As they mapped Y chromosomes across Eurasia, they found something strange. A genetic signature that kept appearing, again and again, from China to Uzbekistan, from Iran to Kazakhstan, from Russia to Pakistan. 1 in every 200 men shared the same Y chromosome. That's 16 million men, all carrying the same genetic marker. All pointing back to one man who lived around 800 years ago in Mongolia. Genghis Khan. This wasn't a metaphor. This was biological proof. His bloodline hadn't just survived. It had exploded. And so, the boy born with nothing, abandoned in the snow, rejected by his own people, had reached through time and embedded himself in humanity. Not with stories, not with myths, but with blood. Genghis Khan had conquered the world, and then kept living inside it. The death of a king usually marks the end of a story. But when Genghis Khan died in 1227, the story was only beginning. The empire he built, forged in blood, fire, and iron, didn't crumble like so many before it. It expanded, it evolved, and it spread his bloodline across the continents like wildfire. What made it different wasn't just the sheer force of arms. It was the legacy of his children, the empire of his DNA. Genghis didn't just leave behind an army. He left behind sons who ruled with the same fury, the same strategic brilliance, and the same desire to dominate. But more than that, he left behind many sons. It's difficult to estimate just how many children he fathered, but records suggest dozens of official sons, and countless others born through his many wives and concubines across Asia. His direct male descendants, particularly those through his 4 official sons, Yoki, Chagatai, Ogadai, and Tolui, became princes, generals, and emperors. And they didn't just inherit his thirst for conquest. They inherited his approach to rule. After his death, the Mongol Empire didn't collapse into chaos like Alexander the Great's or Julius Caesar's. It was divided into powerful, organized sections, each ruled by a son or grandson of Genghis. The Golden Horde ruled the Russian steppes and parts of Eastern Europe. The Ilkhanate controlled Persia. The Chagatai Khanate dominated Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty, founded by his grandson Kublai Khan, ruled all of China. Imagine that. One family, all direct descendants of a single man, ruling from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe. But it wasn't just political power they spread, it was their genes. Every Khan had many wives, every prince hundreds of concubines. Every region they conquered became not just a political acquisition, but a breeding ground for Genghis Khan's bloodline. This wasn't random, it was by design. Genghis believed that blood carried strength, that his blood, forged through survival, sharpened through warfare, and anointed by the heavens, was destined to run through the veins of the world. And for nearly 2 centuries, it did. In Persia, Mongol rulers married into Persian nobility. In China, Kublai Khan embraced Chinese culture, governance, and diplomacy, but never let go of his Mongol identity. His descendants intermarried with Chinese princesses, and even after the fall of the Yuan dynasty, the blood of Genghis remained in Chinese noble lines. In the west, the Golden Horde pressed deep into Europe, reaching Poland and Hungary. Their leaders took Slavic wives. Their soldiers left children in every village and town they passed through. The empire was mobile. It was swift, but its seed was permanent. 100 battles can be forgotten. Cities can fall. Borders can be redrawn. But children? Children remain. Even when the Mongol Empire eventually fractured and faded, Genghis Khan's descendants continued to rise to power, not just in Asia, but in unexpected corners of the world. In India, the Mughal Empire was founded by Babur, a direct descendant of both Genghis Khan and Tamerlane. The Mughals ruled India for over 300 years. In a strange twist of fate, Genghis's blood sat on the throne of the Taj Mahal. But what makes this even more shocking is that his blood didn't just remain in kings and queens. It lived on in commoners, in farmers, in merchants, in shepherds, in teachers. His children's children and their children weren't just rulers. They became everyone. The legacy of conquest eventually turned into the quiet transmission of DNA, passed through generations like a whisper. And that whisper eventually reached the ears of modern science. In 2003, a groundbreaking genetic study shocked the world. A team of researchers analyzing Y chromosome data from over 16 populations across Asia noticed something strange. A specific genetic pattern was showing up again and again, spread across vast regions, from northern China to Uzbekistan, from Siberia to Iran. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a cluster of nearly identical Y chromosomes carried by an estimated 16 million men. The researchers traced it back to one origin point. One man, who lived roughly 800 years ago, in Mongolia. The statistical evidence pointed to one conclusion: Genghis Khan. Let that sink in. One man. 8 centuries ago. Responsible for the DNA of 1 out of every 200 men alive today. Not a myth, not a legend, but a living, breathing scientific truth. His blood didn't vanish in time. It exploded through it. While empires fell, while borders changed, while languages disappeared and kingdoms died, his lineage marched forward invisibly, through generations, through births in tents, castles, huts, and homes. He may have died in 1227, but his genetic fingerprint is still pulsing in the veins of millions of people across the planet. And yet, most of them don't even know it. You could walk past someone in Tehran, in Beijing, in Moscow, in Istanbul, and never realize they carry the spark of a man who once rode across the mountains with 100,000 warriors at his back. That the same blood that founded the largest empire the world has ever seen now types on laptops, flips burgers, drives taxis, teaches classes, lives quiet lives. It's poetic in a way. The man who reshaped the world didn't just leave a mark on maps. He left it in flesh. He's not just in your history book. He might be in your family tree. Empires rise, empires fall. That's the rhythm of history. No matter how mighty, how brutal, how glorious, the world eventually buries every conqueror. Cities are reclaimed by sand, palaces by weeds, and names by silence. And so it was with Genghis Khan. As time passed, kingdoms he once shattered rebuilt themselves. Cultures he once dominated reasserted their pride. And historians, especially in the West, began to rewrite the man who once ruled over more land than any human before or after. They called him a barbarian, a savage, a bloodthirsty warlord who left nothing behind but ashes and corpses. They said he contributed nothing to civilization. No great works of art, no enduring architecture, no refined philosophy. For centuries, European scholars reduced him to a symbol of everything uncivilized. He was the face of Eastern chaos, the monster on horseback who destroyed civilized cities, who burned libraries, who leveled empires. And yet, the truth was far more complicated. The truth, in fact, was dangerous because it shattered the clean narrative of Western superiority. Genghis Khan was not just a raider, he was a reformer, a lawgiver, a strategist, and he left behind more than bones. He left behind a framework for how to build an empire that actually worked. But the world didn't want to remember that. In China, after the collapse of the Yuan dynasty, the Mongol-ruled period started by Genghis's grandson, the succeeding Ming emperors launched an aggressive campaign to erase Mongol influence. They burned records, destroyed statues, painted over murals. Mongol dress, Mongol names, Mongol language, all were outlawed. Genghis, who had once ruled from Beijing, became a taboo, a stain, a ghost best forgotten. In Persia, too, the Ilkhanate crumbled into infighting, and local rulers sought to reconnect with their Persian heritage. The Mongol period was portrayed as a dark chapter, foreign, brutal, un-Islamic. Even though many of Genghis's descendants had converted to Islam and married into Persian dynasties, their origin as Mongol conquerors was painted over with thick coats of shame. In Russia, the memory of the Golden Horde became a scar, a period of humiliation. The Mongols were blamed for keeping Russia backward, for destroying its early cultural development. Genghis and his sons became symbols of oppression, not just forgotten, but despised. But the most curious part? Even in Mongolia, the land of his birth, his legacy faded. Under centuries of Qing rule and later Soviet domination, Mongolians were taught to revere other figures: Buddhist monks, communist leaders, modern politicians. Genghis Khan, once the great unifier, was demoted to a dusty footnote. His name was barely spoken in schools. His story was erased from the global consciousness not by force of arms, but by time, politics, and silence. And yet, while the world tried to erase his memory, his bloodline refused to disappear. It's almost as if history could not kill him. While his monuments crumbled, his chromosomes multiplied. While scholars called him a savage, his descendants became emperors, shahs, sultans, and commoners who unknowingly carried his legacy in every breath. He became a paradox, forgotten in books, yet alive in bodies. That's what makes his story so chilling, because Genghis Khan isn't just a figure from the past. He's a force that kept moving, silently, invisibly, long after the banners fell. In the 20th century, while textbooks still called him a barbarian, scientists began piecing together a different puzzle. It started slowly. Geneticists in Asia noticed recurring Y chromosome markers in unusual concentrations across Central Asia. Then it spread to studies in Iran, Russia, and China. The numbers were staggering. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't local. This was continental. The genetic trail they followed didn't lead to a modern family. It led backward, through centuries of births, marriages, wars, migrations, until it pointed to one man, born in the 1100s, in Mongolia. There was only one historical figure it could be: Genghis Khan. And it wasn't just that his descendants survived. It was how many there were. 1 in every 200 men on Earth today carries a Y chromosome that matches his unique signature. That's about 16 million men. Multiply that by the number of their children and their children's children, and you realize something staggering. Tens of millions of people alive right now. People watching videos, driving cars, using smartphones may carry a piece of Genghis Khan inside them. He's not just a ghost of history. He's in history. He is history. He's in bloodstreams, in smiles, in fingerprints, in bones. Think about that. A man born in a tent, in a tribe with no written language, who rose through betrayal and suffering, who was hunted, cast out, and nearly forgotten, is now part of the literal genetic fabric of the world, and it gets even more surreal. While the world focused on writing his memory out of textbooks, Mongolia began to rediscover him. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Genghis Khan's name roared back into the public. Statues were raised. Airports and universities were renamed in his honor. School books changed. He wasn't just remembered, he was reclaimed, not as a barbarian, but as a symbol of Mongolian identity, pride, and resilience. But even today, there's something almost mythical about him. We still don't know where he's buried. He died in 1227, and his funeral procession was guarded by soldiers who killed anyone who saw it pass. The legend says his grave was trampled by horses, hidden in secret, protected by eternal silence. Modern scientists have searched satellite maps, forests, riverbeds. No one's found it. It's as if history itself refuses to let him rest, or be found. And maybe that's fitting. Because how do you bury a man who never really left? Genghis Khan's armies have long since vanished. His cities have turned to dust. His empire, once stretching from the Pacific to the Black Sea, exists now only in maps and dreams. But his DNA, his bloodline, his impact, still here, still multiplying, still undefeated. Long before genetics, long before DNA tests, long before science could crack the human code, Genghis Khan was already rewriting the laws of inheritance, not in labs, but in war camps and marriage beds. He didn't understand chromosomes. He didn't need to. All he knew was this: if you want to rule the world forever, you don't just conquer it, you breed into it. And 8 centuries later, scientists would uncover just how terrifyingly effective that strategy was. It started as a whisper in the scientific community, just a curious pattern in a few gene samples from Central Asia. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, a group of geneticists led by Dr. Chris Tyler Smith at the University of Leicester and Dr. Mark Jobling began analyzing Y chromosomes, the piece of DNA passed down directly from father to son, unchanged except for rare mutations. What they discovered would shake the foundations of both history and science. Among the men tested across Asia, especially in regions stretching from Mongolia to western China, parts of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and deep into Iran and even Russia, a strange anomaly emerged. Over 8% of all the men in this massive region shared almost the exact same Y chromosome. When scaled globally, it meant that nearly 1 in 200 men alive today, over 16 million people, all descended from a single male ancestor who lived around 800 years ago. That's not a family. That's a dynasty that refuses to die. The researchers didn't name him immediately. They used the neutral term, the star cluster haplotype. But anyone who knew history could see where it pointed. The time matched. The geography matched. The scale of conquest matched. There was only one man in that era with the military reach, the reproductive access, and the cultural dominance to father such an explosion of offspring, Genghis Khan. But the scientists didn't just stop at the numbers. They studied how this phenomenon occurred. It wasn't just the fact that one man had many sons. That's not uncommon in history. It was how consistently and strategically that DNA spread, like a network of rivers, branching out across tribes, kingdoms, and empires. Genghis's sons became rulers. Their sons became rulers. And each of them followed the same pattern: multiple wives, multiple concubines, hundreds of children, and each child carrying the original Y chromosome further and further into the human gene pool. This was a genetic empire, and it wasn't random. It followed political lines. The bloodline spread not just where battles were fought, but where alliances were made. Genghis had married women from every ethnicity and faith in the lands he conquered: Chinese, Persian, Slavic, Turkic, Korean, and more. He absorbed their customs, their languages, and in doing so, planted his legacy in places his army couldn't even stay. In other words, he didn't just breed, he embedded himself into history. Think about this. The Y chromosome doesn't mix like other parts of your DNA. It passes down almost identically from father to son, like a signature time capsule. So when we say 16 million men share Genghis Khan's DNA, we're not talking about a vague connection like, oh, we're all related if you go back far enough. No, we're talking about a direct, scientific, unmistakable link. This is biological dynasty, but it gets even more shocking when you compare it to modern-day dynasties. For example, the Rothschilds, the Kennedys, the Windsors. These families, though powerful and influential, haven't come close to embedding themselves into the DNA of the planet the way Genghis Khan did. Even the most successful politicians or billionaires today might pass their name down for a few generations, but their bloodline remains a drop in the ocean. Genghis Khan, he became the ocean. His genetic reach is so vast that if you lined up all his male descendants today, they would form an empire larger than the populations of Greece, Portugal, and Sweden combined. And yet most of them don't even know it. That's the cruel beauty of it. His name was buried, his face forgotten. But his chromosomes remained undefeated. Every child born with his Y marker is another soldier in a war that ended 800 years ago, a war not for land but for legacy. And it's not just the Y chromosome. Scientists believe his autosomal DNA, the mixed DNA you get from all ancestors, has spread even further, which means even women, and those not in the direct male line, may carry a sliver of his blood without knowing. The deeper science digs, the more it finds pieces of the Khan hidden like whispers in the code of humanity. But here's what haunts historians and geneticists alike. If we can track Genghis Khan, who else is hiding in our blood? What other forgotten emperors, erased queens, silenced warriors have left behind their ghostly fingerprints in our DNA? And are we living their dreams or their curses? In Mongolia today, a DNA test has become a rite of passage. Young men test their Y lineage to see if they carry the mark. If they do, they're not just proud, they're honored. To carry Genghis's blood is to be connected to something larger than life. It's not just heritage, it's destiny. And yet, there's something poetic in this strange twist of science. For all the stories told about greatness, about monuments and wars and written legacies, it turns out the most powerful form of remembrance is in the cells. Genghis Khan's life burned like wildfire. His empire changed maps. But it's his genetic footprint that outlasted them all. While the world tried to bury his name under words like barbarian, his body, his literal code, said otherwise. They couldn't erase him, because he had already written himself into us. What does it mean to live forever? Is it a statue in a city square? A name carved on a mountain? A chapter in a textbook kids skip through in class? Because Genghis Khan has none of those. You won't find his grave. You won't find his face on a coin. Most schools barely say his name without a grimace. He ruled the largest land empire in human history. And yet most of the world remembers him as little more than a wild barbarian from somewhere far away. But he knew that. And maybe that's why he didn't try to live forever through monuments or marble. Maybe he knew the truth, that all of that turns to dust. So he chose something more permanent. Flesh, blood, legacy. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, the earth tried to forget him. Kings who feared him built new cities and named new gods. Scholars who despised him rewrote his story into myth, and the bones of the millions he conquered were left to fade into sand. But while the world tried to bury his story, they forgot something. You can't bury a man whose blood is still walking around. You can't erase someone when his voice echoes through the mouths of his descendants, and you cannot kill a man who never really left. His empire fell. His capital is now ruins, and yet his DNA is alive in 1 out of every 200 men walking the planet. 16 million men, maybe more. That's not a metaphor. That's not poetic talk. That's science. Genghis Khan may be gone, but Genghis Khan won. He outsmarted death. He beat time. He slipped past the silence of history and crawled into our genes. And now he sits there, quietly, invisibly, Inside the blood of shepherds, truck drivers, school teachers, tech workers, and billionaires. Across Asia, across Europe, maybe even across your own family tree. He didn't just want to conquer the world. He wanted to become part of it. And he did. But here's what they don't teach in school. He wasn't just a warlord on horseback. He was a builder of systems, a unifier of tribes. He banned the kidnapping of women. He outlawed torture. He created the world's first international postal system. He allowed freedom of religion. He built a meritocracy before the word even existed. The world remembers how he killed, but it forgets how he ruled. And that's why Uncle Luke's telling you this. Because some men spend their lives chasing glory, fame, power, titles. But Genghis Khan, a boy abandoned on the steppe, a child who watched his father murdered, a nobody forced to eat grass to survive, he rewrote the definition of legacy. Not with monuments, not with medals, but with children. He used love, fear, marriage, and war to turn his own blood into the most successful dynasty in human history. That's not an accident. That's a plan. And you may hate the man. You may question the violence. But no matter where you stand, you have to face the truth. He's still here. In your veins, maybe. In your neighbor's veins. In the taxi drivers, the doctors, the soldiers, the beggars, the kings. Because this isn't just the story of a man who conquered the world. It's the story of a man who refused to be forgotten. And maybe he never will be. You wanted to talk about power? Real power? It ain't about how loud your name rings while you're alive. It's about whether it whispers when you're gone. Genghis Khan didn't just break kingdoms, he built himself into humanity. So next time you wonder if you matter, if you're being remembered, if anything you do will last, just remember the boy in the snow. Alone. Betrayed. Nothing. He built an empire out of survival. And carved his name into history without leaving a single stone behind. That's not just history, that's bloodline warfare. And if that doesn't make you want to do something that echoes through time, you ain't been listening. If you made it this far, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more untold stories just like this. Because here at Uncle Luke Tells, history isn't dead. It's still walking around. Sometimes right inside you.